Discuss Cosatu's position on this development. We are joined via Zoom by Cosatu Regional Secretary Tony Ehrenreich. Well, thank you very much for joining us on our program. Minister Fikile Mbalula, they're clearly explaining government's position regarding the 100% taxi load capacity. Why are you planning to challenge government on this stance?
Well, the point that we want to make very clearly is that nobody must perish in this crisis, neither the taxi industry, but neither workers. If we increase the taxi's capacity to 100%, of course there's going to be problems. The Medical Advisory Council had told government that there are immense challenges and they're recommending against that. So they're saying, let's not move to 100%. It poses too many health risks. But the government did move that way. And we're now hearing the reasons. The reasons are economical. Well, economics are important, but our job as a trade union is to defend our members and join the government in making sure that the contagion of the virus is not spread. We take our direction from the president. President Cyril Ramaphosa said that as we fix the health challenges, we must also fix the national health insurance scheme so that we undo the inequalities and the bad systems of the past. Well, we want to apply the same logic to the transport system. So we're not talking here only about securing the profitability levels or the taxis of some taxi owners. We're talking about building a proper public transport system that's built on the needs of the commuters. The taxi bosses, the bus bosses, and anybody else only plays a small role in providing part of the services, and we must take account of them. But the key consideration must be the life and livelihoods and safety of our members and commuters generally, and that's what we're asking government to consider. We're not happy with 100%, and we believe we've got to review that decision, and we've got to put in place the support for the buses and the taxis to overcome the challenges. But the reality that we want to introduce to the discussions at this stage is that we know that at the moment, the commuter levels, the amount of people traveling in buses and taxis are down to 50%. That means if half of the commuters, the people traveling, are now going to be traveling, then you're going to have half of the taxis and the buses transporting those people. So the taxi industry has a much bigger problem than just the 70%. The 70% is an issue, and we must address that to make sure everybody's safe. But we must address the problem that in future, there's going to be 50% of the commuters. And if we don't have a wholehearted solution to that problem, then there's going to be retrenchments, and there's going to be repossessions of taxis, and there's going to be fights about the routes, which will see a danger for all people. So that's why we're saying we need a comprehensive solution to this challenge, as the president has told us, and we want to work with government to achieve that. But we can't be quiet as our members' lives are put at risk in overcrowded taxis, as is presently proposed.
What do you make out of the seemingly volatile relationship between the government and the taxi industry? I mean, we've seen over the past weeks how they have actually engaged in a rather bellicose way. You remember when he was trying to address some taxi drivers in Tshwane the other day, where they were actually not even giving him a chance to speak. They were actually having contention with the way the banking industry was treating them regarding the relief measures of the payment holidays of the installments of taxes, claiming that some banks wanted to repossess the taxes. So whether the government is trying to mitigate the situation by not taking harsher measures against the taxi industry, or rather the government saying that they are not dancing to the tune of the taxi industry, then what must be done so that the two can come to the party and agree on something that doesn't compromise the lives of the people?
Well, the starting point for us is that it's not about the two coming to the parties and have a cozy discussion. When we develop a public transport system, we must take the public into account. The taxi owners and the bus owners are only a small part of the industry, and no public transport plan can be born on how we secure the profitability levels of some of the bosses of the transport sector. We must focus on the needs of commuters and make sure we put in place a safe and affordable public transport system that is subsidized to undo the geographical disadvantages that commuters face because apartheid put them so far away from their workplaces. So it's a difficult issue that must be confronted, and we have sensitivities for the government. But 26 years later, we must now no longer be talking about plans, we must be implementing solutions. The taxi bosses are only part of the problem, and what we're saying is let's have a whole discussion. Because if your partners in a discussion are disregarding the safety of commuters, many taxi operators have not taken on board the 70% capacity, even when that was in place, because they were just pushing for their profitability levels. And if they're not going to discuss these questions of the safety of all South Africans in a serious way, well, then that's going to make the discussions very difficult. What we want is to look at how do we support the business interests of bus and taxi and rail commuters and and those transport providers, so that everybody's interests are taken into account. But this can't be just a discussion looking at the profitability of a small part of the industry. We think if they're going to mobilize people to be rude to the minister and the public representatives, then that shows that there's a challenge in the discussions that must be held. And it can't just be confined to those two players. This is an important public interest issue that must ensure that the whole of the public is represented there, and government is driving the process to build a public transport system, not just dealing with the interest of a few bosses. We know that part of the challenge is the concentration of ownership. Personally, we support a system that ensures that the drivers have ownership and that their interests are served. But we know that the concentration in the industry, which was a legacy of apartheid and many of the challenges then, that's part of what must be undone. We must change the system. We must subsidize taxis also, because taxis are transporting people over the apartheid old geographical divide. So they need support, but that's not support for them to have increased profits. That's support for them to make sure that workers don't spend so much of their money on public transport. But the main point here today in this discussion is that the 100% threatens the livelihoods and interest and safety of commuters and workers generally. And that's not acceptable, and that must be changed. We want a discussion with the Transport Minister, and we'll continue to engage with him in the good progress that is made. But our discussions must now include the President's office, because clearly the President had announced the 100%, and this represents a huge challenge to all commuters and to their lives, safety woods, but also the spreading of the viruses. So the time has come for us to stand together as a nation, to work together, and to find solutions that benefits everybody's interest. As the President says, this is a moment to change the entire economy, how it's structured and who it's benefited. We must use this moment to undo the old inequalities that have seen Black people resorting to being paupers in their country of birth, and a section of the community, the whites under apartheid, and now a small Black elite being the main beneficiaries. We want to change the economy, we want to change the public transport system, and we want to make sure that the measures that are put in place makes our people's lives easier as they confront COVID now, but also in their long-term public transport interests going forward.
All right, thank you very much for making time to speaking to us. Tony Ehrenreich is Regional Secretary of Cosatu. We're going to take a break, and of course, when we return, we'll be talking about the return of a ban on alcohol sales, and of course, we'll be taking it further in terms of those who are not happy with the move. Let's take a break.